You know, so that was my personal thing that I wanted to talk about as like a thank you.
Awesome.
And just to like catch everybody up on the project. But yeah, I don't know how I'm gonna transition into like talking about COVID or whatnot. But why don't you start the next subject, man? While I flip and sort myself out.
COVID, is that the next topic? But there's that whole row right now about like who gets the virus and when, the vaccine and when and how. That was what all that stuff was a couple of weeks ago about Article 14, about how, you know, the European Union wanted to jack our supply of the vaccine because the companies restricted. Basically, the companies lied about how much vaccine they could produce, but all countries created a vaccine response plan based on the number of vaccines that the companies told them they could supply. But they just fucking bullshitted and they could never produce that many vaccines. And now every country is like flipping the fuck out because no country can actually vaccinate as many people as they told everyone they could. And this all goes back, again, you will be unsurprised to find that capitalism is the root problem of this, because what happened is they gave the pharmaceutical companies a patent on the vaccine, right? And people don't know that that's new. That's not normally done, right? It definitely was not done with the polio vaccine. When the polio vaccine was developed, the guy who developed it, came up with it, whatever, he sold it to the world for $1, I think. So now anyone in the world can make and produce that vaccine without having to pay him for it. He sold the rights. He sold it away, right? But these vaccines that's not happened. So they still hold a patent, which is basically just a copyright on, I actually don't know what the difference between a patent and a copyright is. I think a copyright is works of art and a patent is like an engineering or mechanical thing. But basically what it means is that no one in the world is allowed to produce that vaccine except for Pfizer, which again, you can see why. It's because they want the profit. They want you to have to buy it from them. It's essentially just a piece of paper that solidifies their monopoly on the vaccine. And it never should have been granted to them. That patent should have, I don't know how or what they could have done, but it should have been destroyed, right? It should have been available to the public or public domain so that people didn't have to go to Pfizer to get that vaccine. And what that would have done was meant that any generic lab in the world could have mass produced the vaccine without Pfizer having to be involved and get their cut, essentially. But now, because of the patent, Pfizer wants their cut, and you can only get the vaccine from Pfizer. And now that they can't produce as much vaccine as they said they could, they're restricting supply. That pushes price up. And now all the countries are flipping the fuck out trying to steal vaccines from each other because the company lied to them about how much vaccine they could produce, and they could never produce what they said they could. So that's why there's all that talk about like vaccine nationalism, the idea that like, and that's what happened with the European Union with Article 14 or 16 or whatever it was. Basically, like the European Union tried to jack the supply of vaccine that was coming to the UK. That's basically where it is. That's the last thing I heard about it. I don't really know what's gone on with it since then. I know that Article 14 or 16 or whatever it was revoked, and they didn't get away with it, and they can't do that shit. So they didn't manage to get our supply of the vaccine or whatever. Other than that, I think there's like a tribunal or something. There's a group of doctors and that are suing the government for gross negligence, basically just because of how like poorly they've handled the virus. They're saying that there's a point where if you cock it up too much, you're actually gross negligence. Like if you're a factory owner and you fail to put in like safety requirements and then someone dies because of that, like you're criminally negligent, right? That's what it's called, criminal negligence or gross negligence, right? Essentially, it just means like you fucked up so bad that what you fucked up so bad, it amounts to a crime. And all of these, I think it's like a group of doctors or something, they're literally bringing a lawsuit. They're suing the government. They're essentially saying exactly that. They're saying you fucked up so bad that this amounts to a crime. Like you've handled this virus so fucking poorly that you should actually be held criminally responsible for the amount you've done fucked up. And they should be. There's no doubt about that. Anyone who's even been tangentially paying attention to the news over the past year knows that they've criminally fucked up multiple times. Right from the very start, they were way too slow to lock down the first time. And then they fucked up the track and trace system. They're perpetually fucking up with these tiers of lockdown. They fucked up with the schools. They've been doing that the entire time. They fucked up with the Eat Out to Help Out program. You know, Rishi Sunak's fucking, you know, die at the altar of capitalism, essentially. He sent people out to, they unleashed this whole scheme, which was called Go Out to Help Out, Eat Out to Help Out. And it was basically like, go and eat out, help the economy. And this was like October, November of last year when the virus was still like just making it a comeback, essentially. And he unleashed a program that sent people out into restaurants and bars all over the country. No doubt that killed a fuck ton of people. Again, it's just, you know, it's symbolic of capitalism, you know, the whole system being, you know, you should die for the line to go up, right? Be that the stock market line or the GDP line or whatever line they're telling you that you should die for today. Either way, there's a line out there somewhere and it always wants you to die for it. So that's basically how that's going. But knowing, you know, the government and the power that they hold there within, there's no way that they should, there's no way that they will be held accountable, I don't think. You know, the government is above the law. You know, nothing ever really touches them. I could see something ridiculous happening, like they get fined 20 quid or something. Like there'll be a huge uproar. And, you know, the lawsuit will say, yay, we finally got justice. And then you'll like read the fine print and it'll be like, yeah, 20 quid fine. And that'll be it, essentially. Because ultimately people in power never get held accountable, because they control everything, right? And when you write the laws, then you're essentially above the law. Not only that, but they control everything. They control, you know, like I said, all of society. You know, the police work for them ultimately. So honestly, who's going to bring a case, really? Like I said, all the nurses and everything are getting together to bring the case, but I don't think it'll go anywhere. Like, obviously, I think everyone knows that the hardest entity in society to sue successfully and win is the government, right? Because they control everything. You know, the judicial branch is literally a branch of the government. And, you know, the government never wants to be held accountable for anything. I remember, you know, Boris did a press conference a couple of weeks ago and he came out and literally said, like, we did everything we could ever. We did everything correct. There's nothing I could have done better ever. Right. And it was just so incredibly laughable that, you know, it's kind of jaw dropping because, like I said, anyone who's even been paying attention halfway to news knows that there's no possible way that's true. But hey, they say it, they get away with it. Like I said, they are bringing a lawsuit, but I doubt it'll go anywhere, honestly. There's an easy tie-in with the Unabomber thing there as well.
Flipping Unabomber, don't you worry about that, mate.
But that's an easy tie-in right there, because he literally talks about that, right? The idea that, like, you know, technology is marketed to people as, you know, the savior or the correct way to do something, or just like the next advance in just the next thing, right? But then it quickly becomes you have to have that thing just in order to function, right? So cars were seen as like, you know, the ultimate bastion of freedom, do whatever you want, wherever you want, whenever you want. And then it quickly became the fact that you have to have a car just to do anything, like to have a job, essentially. Because, I mean, what are you going to do? Like, rely on buses? I mean, if you're like near a city or like a giant population town, that might be decent. But out here, like, the bus comes through this village like once every 2 hours. So it's every 2 hours. And the last one's at 3 p.m. Right? So if you have a job, you can't catch that bus. There's no fucking way. Because, like I'm saying, most jobs don't finish at 3 p.m., right? So like technology is marketed to people as being the solution, but it ends up being a trap that you have to have just in order to do the basics. And it's the same shit about when you see like, I was like on Reddit or whatever, and people were talking about like what's going to be the thing that solves global warming. And everyone's talking about Tesla. Oh, yeah, but everyone will buy a Tesla and that'll win. It's like, dude, you have no fucking idea what you're talking about. Like, those cars are like 80 grand each. Like, what the fuck kind of world do you live in where everyone on the planet can buy a 80 grand Tesla and that, first of all, no one can do that. Second of all, that won't even save the planet. Like, even if you gave everyone on the planet a Tesla, that's not going to save the planet. It's the same thing with veganism, by the way. Like, veganism's good, sure, but if every single person on the planet was 100% vegan, it doesn't save the planet. It just doesn't, right? So there's no actual solution here for saving the planet that doesn't involve a, drastic reordering and reshaping of society and class structure, essentially, right? I mean, it's like 100 companies are responsible for, is it like 70% of all emissions? And the top 90% of income earners, no, the top 10% of income earners are responsible for 90% of all greenhouse gas emissions, right? So anyone who tries to tell you like, oh, it's a population problem is bullshitting, because 10%, unless they're talking about the top 10% of income earners, because they use 90% of all the resources. So yeah, it's them. They're literally a parasite on the face of humanity. They're literally destroying the planet. It's not abstract. I mean, it's very material. They are actually doing this. They exist. They're there. They've got names, faces, and addresses, right? This isn't ethereal or ephemeral. We're not talking about things that are like, hard to understand. Those are real people. They're actually out there doing that shit, right? So, there's no way essentially to save the planet without a reordering or a restructuring of class society. And that's why I think global warming ultimately puts a timer on the current incarnation of capitalism that we live under, right? I mean, it literally can't survive under these conditions. Now, that doesn't mean you necessarily are going to get some kind of socialistic world order. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that capital has to do something now. It has to move. It has to adapt and change. And it always will. It always has, throughout the centuries. Capital is, of course, the force that reorders and reshapes society. But it can't continue to do the way it is now, right? It can't just exist off of fossil fuels that it has previously. It has to actually jump, and it'll now jump into, like we said, AOC's Green New Deal that will be absorbed by capital. Capital loves that, because all those giant corporations that have been profiting from the extraction of fossil fuels will now hop into green energy and renewables, and you'll have the same virus of capital. It will just exist within, solar energy now, and solar. And it doesn't mean those things are bad. Like, obviously solar power is not a bad thing. It's capital that's the problem, because we can have solar power and geothermal power and wind power. You can have all those things just without private capital. The problem here is private capital, not, renewable forms of energy, of course. But ultimately, that is what will happen. The current incarnation of capitalism that we live under it has a time limit. It has a shelf life, and it's going to expire fairly soon. And again, it will probably turn for the worse than for the better. I mean, as the contradictions of capital break down, capital needs a tighter grip. And that's why you see tighter social controls. You see more laws being introduced. You see more censorship coming down from social media giants, right? Because as capitalism faces more of a crisis, its grip on society tightens. It wants more control over everything because it's losing control. So again, it's going to, more control over social media censorship, more control over the politicians, more control over laws, right? And that's essentially how you end up with fascism, right? That's why fascism is capitalism in decay, because when capitalism hits a crisis or it decays, it will break fascist way before it will do anything to actually solve itself. Fascism is essentially just, the naked rule of capital, because in a system like we have now, capital still rules. It just has to go through the politicians, and it gets worked out in the sort of bureaucratic nature of Westminster. And when you actually live under fascism, it's just the sort of naked face of capital rules everything, and there is no pretense or false understanding of a democracy here. It just is what it is, right? Capital just openly says no, like, we run this, and that's just what it is.
Another point about COVID that I wanted to raise that really shows the exploitation of this situation and really how long we're probably going to be stuck in this. For example, if you get a bus, imagine this, right? This happened to me. I got a bus to work, paid £5. It cost me £2.40 for like one way. Paid him a £5 note, took me ticket, looked at him. He started driving. I was like, motherfucker, where's me change? He said, you don't get change. I was like, what? He said, you don't get change because of COVID. I was like, so obviously I never took it out on him, but I sat down fuming. I was like, oh my God. The first thing that went in my head was like people who were poor and like, oh my God, I lost like what, fucking £2.60 change. That's like a lot. That's some bread. That could be some milk, or it could be like, bread and some ham and all that, and that could do you for like a good few days. But like, this bus driver's just fucking pocketed it. So like, I went on Twitter, I like tagged Arriva in it, and I was like, you fucking thieves. I was like, I can't believe you are just actually robbing people. I said, just take the money, fine, not worried about fucking COVID, but you don't give change. And they're like, yeah, this is just because of COVID, to stop the spread. I was like, I was just like, oh, look, it's just disgusting that like people are being robbed daily on the buses and like nothing's happening. I think like the first, where was it? I think it was Chile. One of the first big uprisings from the people was when the price of buses got too high, that the students rose up and the population rose up like, no, this is taking the piss. These prices have to come down. We are being robbed. If it wasn't for COVID and Arriva and the bus services that people do rely on to go to work, there's buses all the time over here because we're in a city, it's like dead late and they're dead frequent. And this is what people rely on because we don't need cars in the UK, as I've said. It's kind of a decadence, really, because of how widespread public transport is, and it's actually very convenient and it's better for the environment. But this is happening and they're getting away with it, and they wouldn't ordinarily. And I do feel like this is blind robbery. So when there's what's happening with all of this money that they're pocketing, I think it's just turning into profit. Okay, so I work in, and what's happened is so many small businesses have shut down because of COVID. They simply can't, because of government guidelines, open or even function properly. Whereas like massive companies as the Tesco, Marks and Spencer, all of these massive monopoly giants, these are like seen as essential businesses, whereas the middle class businesses, they're not seen as essential, and the only difference is they're middle class and the owners of like Asda and the other supermarkets are capitalists who own stocks for them businesses, and it ties into like that stock market and that line on the stock market that you referred to earlier. So when I see all of these middle class businesses closing down, I see Arriva just blind robbing the population. I see like McDonald's having to pay, like making as much money as they would ordinarily from people feeling like Mackey's is some special place now, and like they've got Deliveroo serving all the people at home, and then they've got like all the people coming through drive-through, but they need less staff to function because of this, because there's no foot traffic coming into store. All of these companies are having untold profits like never before. There's so many quotes if you search online from business owners, from real estate agents who are coming out, and you can just search it. There's so many examples of this where people are saying COVID is a blessing in disguise. I think a couple of politicians have been called out and saying that COVID's a blessing in disguise.
Well, it won't. I mean, what's happening is the consolidation of small business being bought up by the monopolies. Like all those companies that couldn't exist, couldn't, survive under COVID restrictions, are going out of business and then not coming back. They're just going to get bought up by larger companies. And it's already happening. It is happening, right? And that's just, again, the nature of capital.
Let's just give a little quick introduction for him. His name's Ted Kaczynski. He's known as the Unabomber because he attacked universities, airline places as well, and fucking somewhere else. But really, what it was, he was a mathematics prodigy. They'd emphasise with this fact that technology has dominated us. One of the main themes throughout it is that, it even ends on is this red light, on a highway when you're on a road and there's a red light there and there's nobody either side. I don't know if anybody's actually been stuck at a red light. Like I've had a scooter, mates had the bike, and there's times where the traffic sensor doesn't pick you up. So you're stuck at a red light. So you're like, what the fuck? And this is what people do all the time. There's no risk nowhere. There's no cars coming. There's nobody crossing the road, but you're stuck at this red light. And that's what, frustrated him, and it got into the mind of the investigator who was working on this case, who had to get into his mind to understand who he was. What was he? Was it the profiler? So, he had to understand the psyche. And in the end, the profiler is looking at this red light, knowing that no cars coming, but it's the domination of this technology, which really it's ideology and the law, which is created by capitalists that make people sit at this red light. So again, I've been at this red light probably, I'm going to fucking admit to embarrassing myself here. Not that I haven't just been fucking crying down a microphone, but like I've been stuck at this red light for like 5 minutes and I'm like, fuck this. So like obviously when you're there, you're like, should I go now? And you're like, no, because what if the next car is a fucking police car and then I get I get things on my license? Police don't fucking care. You went through a red light. That's all they see it as. Even though it's like, no, the sensor didn't fucking pick me up. I've been here for fucking ages. Come on. They're not going to care. So again, this is the fear of the consent leads to the coercion leads to consent, and that leads to the consent of people being ruled, and people are ruled by fear. So that, I think, like, that's what I wanted to get out of it. It's not technology that dominates us, it's how capitalists use technology to dominate us, and it's the fear from the law, which is obviously the whole point in the state revolving around law, to make us scared in order to just do things that are right. Like if there's no fucking cars coming either side, you can see for miles either side of the road, some people still might be hesitant to cross that red light.
It's just the idea that people give their agency over to a technocratic system, right? In a world that made any sense, if there's nothing left and right of you, you can just go, right? But in the reality of the situation is that there are people, and that everyone essentially, that will sit there and they've given their agency over to a red light, right? If the red light is there, then I can't go. If it's green, then I can go. But in reality, it shouldn't be determined by the color of the light. It should be determined by if there's traffic or not. If there's traffic, don't go. If there's no traffic, go, right? But to the technocratic system, right, it's been replaced by a light. So now you're looking for permission from the light. Instead of relying on your own judgment, on your own eyes, on the fact that you can see there's nothing coming, you give your agency over to the light. And if the light's red, then you're going to sit there for 10 minutes, even if there's no cars on the road. At the crossroad you're at, there's no cars, there's no traffic, right? You'll still sit there at that red light. It's because, you've given your agency over to a technocratic system. It's essentially what happens when, through, technologification, when a population gives its agency over to technology. And now, you're always looking for permission. You're looking for the red light or the green light to see whether you can do something or not, when you know that there's no cars coming. So you should just be